So we finally got around to Doubleswing, and I almost forgot just how much fun this build is to play. It's one of the most responsive skills that the Barbarian has, just feels very satisfying chopping enemies up, running around. It speed farms like an absolute god because of that short animation, but it's just very, very fast in general. It's super tanky as well because you get to use a lot of really powerful defensive aspects, and of course it has tons and tons of damage, to the point where even without uber uniques, you can easily farm tier 70, tier 80 in the pit, and if you do have really good gear, then I've seen people quite easily push past 110 as well, with some variation of this build. But really, the thing that really sells this build to me is just how accessible it is. The gear requirements are so low that you can quite easily play this before you get to level 100, and it is at its core an endgame build. It's able to do everything very, very, very easily. So as always, let's kick this build off by talking a little bit about the skill tree. Now, we are going to have 2 points into lunging strike, but we're not really ever going to use this, so don't worry too much about that. We have, of course, Doubleswing. Now, we have Furious Doubleswing because this will give us a permanent berserking buff, as all we have to do is use something like Warcry of Wrath of the Berserker to get the buff rolling, and then we can sustain it by just hitting things with Doubleswing, which is absolutely fantastic. We have Imposing Presence and we have Martial Figure here, which are just for DR, like damage reduction. It's passive, so you don't really have to ever think about it. We then over here have Strategic Rallying Cry. This gives us 3 things. It gives us a boost of movement speed, resource regeneration. Was actually 4 things now that I'm counting it. Never mind, not going to edit it out. We get Unstoppable, and then we also get Fortify. So this is a really, really powerful tool for all bar builds, and it's why you practically see it in every single one of them. We only want 1 point here in Challenging Shout because it gets us the damage reduction. The life we don't really want, and neither the Thorns or the Fury because we just don't need it. Over here, we have Enhanced Warcry only. This is to give us another source of berserking. And you'll understand why I have so many sources of berserking in just a second. So we'll look at that in just a moment once we get to the gear section. We've completely buffed the fuck out of our shouts. We have Booming Voice for increased duration, Raid Leader, which heals us while we have a shout active, and then we have Guttural Yell, which reduces the enemy damage coming in. So very, very powerful once you have all of these buffs. Shouting, you want to kind of just do more or less on cooldown because this build has a ton of cooldown reduction. So you just fire away, no worries. We have Swiftness for movement speed because this is a very fast build, and why not make it faster? We have Aggressive Resistance, which gives us damage reduction while berserking, which is basically permanent. And the same with the Fury Generation from Prolific Fury, basically a permanent Fury regen buff. Then we have Pit Fighter for damage reduction against distant, as well as more damage against close. Thick Skin, really this is only here so we can get into counter offensive, which gives us a really nice damage bonus. And then down here, we're using Wallop and we're using Concussion. And this is because we are using a one-handed mace, which does activate these. So as long as you're using a mace in any capacity, it doesn't have to be two-handed, then you can use Wallop and you can use Concussion for the big damage and also the extremely high chance to stun. These are very, very powerful. We have 3 points into Tempered Fury because this build does scale with Max Fury because we are using a Magnum Opus, which I'll talk about in the gear section. We're using Wrath of the Berserker because it is cracked. It's the best ultimate by far. And then we're using Unconstrained because this is a Berserk style build. This is 100% the best key passive for damage uptime on this build. And then just before we move on to gear, I just want to talk about the weapon setup because this is very important for this build. It's just the one thing. We are going to be using a Magnum Opus, but we are also using a one-handed mace. It's very important that you have a one-handed mace so that you can have access to Wallop and Concussion. After that, for our technique slot, you can bring this up by pressing Shift-C in-game. You'll see that I've set my technique to the two-handed axe technique, which gives us a nice little 7% damage bonus to vulnerable enemies. Now, let's have a little talk about gear, and let me know, what do you think of this transmod, boys? I went for a Death Knight look. I think I pulled it off pretty well, though, to be fair. I'm really liking this. But yeah, let me know, what do you rate this out of 10? But going through the gear, we have a Tusk Helm of Yoritz. Now, I have a very nice one here. The reason we go for this, and we go for this in a lot of builds, is because it synergizes so well with Berserking. If we Berserk while Berserking, so an example of this would be if you were to press Wrath of the Berserker and then Warcry after, There's a 50% chance that when you do that, you become even more angry, which grants you 15% additional damage, plus fury per second, plus cooldown reduction, in addition to all of the stats that this item already has, which is very, very, very powerful. So we definitely like that a lot. We are socketing rubies in all of our gear as well. You can actually see we have 50k life without any uber uniques, which is just mad. That's insane. For our chest piece, now this gear is a little bit flexy. You kind of want to do what you're missing, so I will leave on the the build planner that's in the description the more general stuff, because a lot of what you'll see on my character was specific to what I was missing. But in terms of the gear, like you have all bases covered, so we'll still go through it, and you will see that some of my tempers are wrong, and that's just the name of the game. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't, right? So for the chest, you're going to go for max life. You're going to either get strength, a resistance, or armor based on what you need. And again, refer to the build planner to get more details on that. But you also definitely want to try and get fury per second on this piece of gear. It's the only piece of gear where you can get this. So slap that on there, and that is going to help a lot with this build. As for tempers, definitely imposing presence. Really, really, really powerful. And then if you can, you want to try and hit either the priority being ranks to concussion or stun length duration. Don't get upheaval stuns for it. This was just me bricking my item. Then as far as aspects go, I've put concussive strikes on here. Not only does this give us an additional source of CC, which is very nice. We're basically going to chain CC bosses with this build. But when they are CC'd, we're going to do a lot of extra damage. Moving on to gloves then, these are pretty straightforward. You're going to want to go for strength, attack speed, and crit chance. And then for tempers, damage to close, and then you want concussion. And for like the damage roll as well, I will say that it is worth having somewhere in your gear one roll to damage while berserking, because that will help a lot with the Blood Rage Paragon node, which scales with that particular stat. So you could put that on gloves or any of your weapons, but it's important to know that you're going to want one of those. Then as far as the aspect goes, we have gone for Berserk Ripping. We need some source of bleed, and because we're permanently berserking, this is a very, very consistent way to make sure that we have that uptime up on that piece of gear. Now moving on to the pants. Like with the chest piece, depending on what you need, you may want to flex one of these rolls. So strength, max life, armor, and or a resistance, so that you're making sure that your resistance capped. I have armor on this one, and my resistances are actually over on my rings. Then again, like with the chest piece, you want ranks to imposing presence, and either stun duration or ranks to concussion, with the priority being on ranks to concussion until you hit 10 ranks anyways, which is very hard to do, but if you do, then you can move to stun duration. As for my aspect, we have Undying, so every time we cast a skill, we heal for 2% life. We attack so fast that we're basically healing like an insane amount, which you heal so much while using Undying. Synergizes extraordinarily well with this build. Moving on to boots then. These are nice and easy. Really, you want to go for max life, movement speed, and a resistance, or you can have the armor here and the resistance on the pants, vice versa. For tempers, I like to take base movement speed and then ranks to concussion again. As for the aspect, we have anemia. This is another source of stuns. So we have a daze and 2 stuns, which is just insane. This is what's going to get bosses falling over and taking tons of damage very, very quickly. And then as for the implicit, the one I like to go for is attacks reduce Evade's cooldown. However, triple Evade is also a pretty strong option. Now, moving on to weapons, we outfit all of these with green gems. This is to give us increased crit damage. And also for the two-handed mace, the one-handed mace, and the two-handed sword, we use the same 3 base affixes, which are strength, max life, and critical damage. Tempers are where it gets a little bit complicated, so for me, at least on my two-handed mace, you can see I've got damage while berserking here, because like I mentioned a minute ago, it's important to have this roll at least on one piece of gear, and I chose to have it here. Other than that, you'll want to go for either close or flat damage. You can just stack berserking if you prefer, but I'd recommend going for close because that will help with boss damage. Then as far as the Dust Devil tempers go, it's important that you get this part right, because there is a cap to, first of all, how big your Dust Devils can get. They can only get an extra 100% bigger. So you don't want to overcap that by rolling Dust Devil size on every single piece of gear. We do have an aspect here, Fierce Winds, that increases the size already. So it's 40% right off the bat. So we can only increase the size by a further 60%. There are two ways that you can do that. You can roll the increased size onto, say, for example, a two-handed weapon, which will give you way over that cap. So you can see here I've got 75%. I'm already overcapped by 15%. Alternatively, the most efficient thing to do is to actually roll it on the one-hander and then to try and hit it with a masterwork, and that will also get the job done as well and be far, far more efficient. As for the other two weapons, you'll want Dust Devil's chance to cast twice on one of the two-handers and then damage on the other for the best outcome for your DPS. On the one-handed weapon, we go for accelerating as far as the aspect is concerned. Attack speed is very, very valuable for this build because we're using the Windlasher aspect on this weapon, on the two-hander here. And every time we double swing, we create a Dust Devil. So the more double swings, the more Dust Devils. Very, very, very obvious synergy there. So we want to hit as fast as possible so we can just absolutely fill the screen up with tornadoes. And then our final weapon is the Magnum Opus. For any dual wield build, this is basically a must-have. It just increases our damage by a crap ton, and this is based on our Max Fury, which we get a lot of from the weapon itself, our Yorit, and then quite a bit from the Paragon board too. Now moving on to jewelry, I think it's important just to quickly preface this part by saying that mine are a mess. So I will try go over the best practices for what you want on these, but the build planner will have like the exact stuff I would recommend. But that being said, what I would suggest is trying to get some combination of crit chance, strength, and attack speed. One of your rings will need a resistance on it, and then the other, which is this ring up here for me, will have make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. This is so good. This is way better than I thought it would be coming into this season, because it is a very, very, very good way to keep vulnerable uptime basically up 100% of the time on like a boss, for example. So really, really, really liking this role. And so you'll want to get a mixture of those stats. So strength, crit, attack speed, res, and enemies made vulnerable for 2 seconds. So you see I've got the right sort of mix here, but it's a bit all over the place. As far as the tempers go for both of them, you can go for damage while berserking or close, and then you want resource generation with dual wielded weapons, because this rolls very, very, very high and get a lot of resource gen from this. As far as aspects go on the rings, we have Ferocious Rage, which gives us a refund of fury when we kill an enemy. And then we also have Bold Chieftains for that big, fat, juicy cooldown reduction on all of our shouts. Now, moving on to the amulet, and this item again is a bit of a mess. I really wish this cold resistance was on the ring instead, so that on the amulet I could have a combination of crit chance, attack speed, cooldown reduction, or ranks 2 counter offensive. That would have been a lot better. You can see I hit damage while berserking on this one again. This could, also be close damage. I'd recommend close damage, honestly. I've been forced to go for an armor roll myself because I've not masterworked my gear or rolled a greater affix armor on, I believe it was my pants. So this isn't high enough to keep me armor capped without that. That's important to sort of pay attention to. However, the moment I have enough armor, I will change that to imposing presence, and that's what you'll see on the build planner. Quickly circling back, because I missed something very, very important. The devilish aspect which we have on our amulet is extremely important to this build. After generating 100 fury, our next direct damage creates 2 Dust Devils, which will be, of course, our double swing. And we generate a ton of fury, so much. We get fury when we refund through killing enemies with Ferocious Rage. We have fury per second on Urits. We have fury per second on our chest, as well as double swing generating 25 fury when it hits a stunned enemy as well. So lots and lots and lots of fury coming in. So we're going to be spawning these extra Dust Devils a whole bunch. Then finally, as far as the gems in your jewelry go, these are a person-to-person basis. It really just depends on how high you rolled, where you rolled, and what you rolled on your gear. So make sure you're taking a look at your resistance tab and picking the appropriate gems. Now, it's okay sometimes to be a little bit under some of them. Just you don't want to be like 20+% under, because you will get absolutely wrecked. Now, moving on to the Paragon board, and while we're going through this, I just want to quickly mention that mine in-game is slightly different to what you'll see on the build planner. Reason for this is that my gear is so bad that I had to like move points to resistances and stuff like that to make sure that I actually had those capped. But, I mean, generally, it's still basically the same thing. And we'll just be going through the key points anyways in the video. And that's starting us with Wrath then. So we have 80% critical strike damage as well as generating even more fury through critical strikes, which is very, very important for us. We then go up into the Blood Rage board here and we have Twister. Of course, we want all of that insane Dust Devil damage at 500 extra percent, plus a multiplicative increase of 13% damage in general after spawning a Dust Devil, which is going to be basically permanent. Now, here's where you can see some of those extra points that I used for fire resistance, but if I didn't need that, you know, I'd probably put some more points in Wrath, or I'd get some more like Berserk damage points. We also have, of course, Blood Rage, which is the legendary Paragon node that gives us a big fat damage boost based off of our damage while berserking up to a cap of 30%, and that's multiplicative. If you don't know what that means, it just means it's a lot. But just quickly going over a common point of confusion here. You don't actually need to kill a bleeding enemy in order to get the damage bonus. Killing a bleeding enemy just gives you a 10% chance to grant berserking. But I mean, that's great, but we already have about 1,000 ways to berserk in this build. So, you know, it's neither here nor there. We're just taking it for the damage boost, and that is the same for most other builds. Then going over to the right here, we go into the Carnage board. We get a ton of attack speed here. Again, while berserking, crits increase our attack speed, so that works very well for us. We have Ambidextrous, which is just a must-have for a build like this. A big fat damage boost, as well as boosting all of the blue nodes around it, which we're using damage reduction and damage while berserking. Moving up into Warbringer. Now, because this build uses Magnum Opus, that means we're going to scale from max fury. So we want to get as much of that as humanly possible. So this board is an absolute must. And it also comes with a lot of all resistance, which is very, very valuable for us. And we, of course, pop in the exploit glyph here as well. Then moving over here to the Decimator board. Decimator, very, very powerful again. Just big multiplicative damage boosts for making enemies vulnerable and or overpowering, which we should do with the amount that we attack pretty frequently. And then in this one, we have Territorial. Really good, just solid glyph. Nice little bit of damage reduction as well as some damage increase to close enemies. And finally, going up into the Flawless Technique board. We don't actually go for the legendary node, but we do get Disembowel. And this means that we're going to be getting a bunch of cooldown from killing bleeding enemies, which we're going to be doing quite often because we have Berserk Ripping. And of course, we get all of this really useful damage reduction from close. And that's the build there. Really is one of my favorites. I've always been a big fan of Doubleswing. Just super responsive, quick and snappy. And for me, like one of the ultimate AFK farmers, if I just want to run around a Helltide or farm like tier 100s or tier 60 pits, this is my go-to, even though I'm not even using Uber Uniques on this build. So, yeah, couldn't recommend it enough. I hope you enjoy it. If you did, if you do, don't forget to leave a like, maybe consider subscribing. And, yeah, I'll catch you on the next one. Love you. Bye.